Welcome into Lead Her Forward, a celebration of girls and women in sports on ESPN Wisconsin. Right now, I'm joined by Michelle Smallmon. You can hear her on Unsportsmanlike from 5 to 9 a.m. on ESPN, alongside Evan Cohen and Chris Canty. Michelle, thanks so much for joining me. So excited to have you on.
Oh, thanks for having me. The pleasure is all mine.
Love it. You're literally from the set of Unsportsmanlike. I was just watching you when I was on the treadmill this morning, so feels weird to see the set from a different angle, but I love it.
Yes, see it behind me. I'm actually still sitting in my chair from the show today.
Perfect. Love it. Yeah. So do you want to just walk us through kind of how you got to be on Unsportsmanlike? What are the stages that you went through in your career to get to where you are?
Oh my gosh, how much time do we have? Because it was not a linear journey for me, that's for sure. I even from going to college, I never really thought that this would be something that I could do in my life or a seat that I could occupy. I think particularly because there'd never really been a woman that I could look to say, I want to be her, because there was not that person, at least locally for me in St. Louis, there was not that person. And there wasn't really that person nationally in the sports talk space that I could say she's who I aspire to be. So I didn't expect this at all. It just kind of happened for me. But I went to college pre-med, and my very first class, I went in there. It was advanced chem. The professor walked in, started writing chemical equations on the board. And I was like, no, not smart enough for this. This is not for me. So I made a hard pivot and changed my major to broadcast journalism. And I had a wonderful advisor. And I spoke to her and said, or she asked me, if you could do anything on earth, what would you want to do? And I said, I want to follow our basketball team and cover this basketball team, because that was the 2005 Illinois basketball team that inevitably went to and unfortunately lost in the national championship game. And I saw firsthand the connectivity of sports. I had always loved sports, but saw just how it can take over a community and bring people together. And everyone was cheering for the same thing and pulling the rope the same way. And I thought, this is so special and this is so unique, and I want to be a part of this. If I can somehow get paid to be a part of this, that's a dream job. So I changed my major. I started doing any internship that I could find. And when I graduated college, I actually got hired in TV. I was a production assistant for a morning show, and I worked from 4 a.m. until 2:30 p.m. And then I would leave every day after I did that shift and go to the sports office, because I was working in news at the time, and just sit there from 2 to 6 and beg them for something to do, because I wanted to work in sports so badly. And eventually they started giving me little things to do in sports. And then the program director of the sports department, Rennie Knott, got a weekend show on ESPN radio when it came to town in St. Louis. And he knew I was so desperate to do anything in the sports space. He was like, hey, do you want to be one of the co-hosts of the show? And I said, sure. I've never done radio in my life, but sure. And on my one day off, I would drive an hour to do a 3-hour show and get paid $50 every 2 weeks. But it was really fun and I really enjoyed it. And that kind of started my radio career. And it's just kind of been slowly but surely climbing since then.
That's awesome. I love it. What was it even like when you found out that you were going to be hosting Unsportsmanlike, ESPN National, every single morning, drive time, all the people that have come before you in that exact time slot? What was it like hearing, I guess, the news that you were going to be on the show?
Well, I was speechless. I did not expect it. To give you a little bit of background on that. So I had been in St. Louis, and I was hosting the morning show for ESPN St. Louis, which was a dream come true in itself, something I never expected, especially because I was a producer for so long. I never really thought that I would be on the other side of the glass, and to get that opportunity, period, let alone in my hometown market, covering teams that I know and that I love, and working alongside a legend in St. Louis and in the broadcast industry, and Randy Carricker, who I also have a close personal friendship with. For me to be in that spot working with him in that market was a dream come true. But after the pandemic, all of us started kind of reevaluating our life and thinking about things in a different way. And St. Louis is always home for me. It will always be home. I know I can always go back there. But during the pandemic, I started thinking, I've never lived in a big city in my entire life. And this is something that I really want to do, and I'm running out of time to do it. And so I went to my bosses in St. Louis and said, this is something I really need to do. And they were shocked because the show was in a great place. We were crushing it with ratings and revenue, and things were going smoothly. And, they did something really rare where they cared about me more as a person than they did as an employee. And they let me go to New York. They let me reconfigure my contract with them. So I moved to New York City without a full-time job, without an apartment, and without a plan. I had gotten the lowest possible on-air deal that you can get with ESPN, which is a usages deal. So basically, when they need you to do something, you're coming off the bench. And I had been doing that while working all of these other side hustles in New York just to pay my rent and kind of figure things out. But then, they had some things happen at the network level, and they needed people to fill in on a more consistent basis. So in that summer leading up to me getting the call, I had been working on ESPN Radio daily. They had given me kind of a month to work on Canty and Carlin because they had those guys filling in on other positions. And when they called me, it was after a show on a Friday. And I will never forget this. Justin Craig called me and was like, I just want to check in. You've been doing a great job. We've been really pleased with your work, and we wanted to offer you something more permanent. And I was like, great, whatever you have, I'll take it. And he's like, we want to offer you the morning show. And I thought he meant the overnight shift into the morning, because that's how where I was relative to this phone call. I never thought that I could take such a massive leap from where I was. And I was like, oh, great. So like 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. And he's like, no, the morning show. And I go, what? Did you know who you called? Are you sure? Like, am I getting punked right now? And he laughed and was like, no, we think you'd be a great component to what we're putting together. And to be able to call my parents and tell them that I got this job was one of the most amazing moments of my entire life, because I moved on September 4th, 2022. And they thought I was crazy. They were supportive, but they thought I was crazy. And I said, just give me a year. I'll figure it out. If I don't get a full-time job within a year, I'll move back to St. Louis, and I'll be thrilled and content to do so. But I left September 4th, 2022, and we started the new show September 5th, 2023. So
oh my gosh.
That's just, a little bit of advice to everybody to listen to your intuition and take a risk if you feel like you can, because had I never bet on myself, I wouldn't be sitting here in this studio talking to you right now.
Absolutely crazy. I love that. You did bring up the idea of time. I feel like that's something that I know it's been in my mind. I'm only 26 years old, but to me, 26 years old, I'm like, there's 20-year-olds that are like grinding harder than I probably am. But I feel like just for women, time is such a big thing, and especially in the sports industry, because it's like I feel like you constantly hear like, oh, the next younger, prettier thing is going to come along. Like the prettier broadcaster is going to come along and she's going to take the job. Or I don't know, you think about even personal wise, like there's only a set amount of time that you can have kids and stuff like that. And like balancing that with a job and all of that. So like, were you in your head a lot about the time aspect of finding a career and making something of yourself?
Yes, you nailed it. The reason that I wanted to move to New York when I did is because of the pressure of time, because I'm in my 30s. I do not have children yet. And I thought, if I'm ever going to go down that route, I won't have the opportunity to be selfish and take a chance like this. And that's why I really felt that clock ticking. And I thought, this is your window. This is the only time in your life that potentially you can take a leap like this. And I'd rather try it and it not work out or get redirected in another way, because failure is simply redirection into where you need to be. It's not really a failure if you look at it that way. But I thought, this is the only time that I can take this risk. And it worked out for me. But I certainly felt that clock ticking. And I know exactly what you're saying about also feeling the clock slowly tick on your career. You're right. The time aspect is different for women than it is for men. Unfortunately, we feel it in a different way, I think. But I always look at it like this. Had I gotten this opportunity 10 years ago, I would not be prepared to take it. I needed the life experience and every stop along the way to be able to be the person that I needed to be in order for this job to be what it is, and for me to be able to fit into this job. And I think social media is such a part of this now, because we're constantly looking at everyone else's life and career highlights in real time. And they say comparison is the thief of joy. And it's so true, because if somebody else gets a job at 22, that doesn't mean that you at 32 or whatever age you are somehow failing because or you're lagging behind because they got a job at a different stage in their life. And maybe you need to be gaining the experience that you can along the way to put yourself in alignment to be in the position to receive the job that would be perfect for you. Because that's exactly what happened to me. I was a producer for a really long time. I worked in TV. I made the pivot to on air later than most people ever do. But I truly think had I not had all that production experience and gained the knowledge of building a show, of knowing which guests are relevant, on which questions to ask, on the timing of things, on the pacing of a show, on working with a team and leading a team, I wouldn't have been able to have the skill set needed to be ready for this job when it presented itself. So I feel the pressure on the time just as much as everybody, and it certainly gave me a sense of urgency to take a leap. But I also think that we as women cannot feel like getting things potentially later in our life is somehow a negative, because it's all going to come when it needs to.
Love that. This is Lead Her Forward, a celebration of girls and women in sports across ESPN Wisconsin. I'm Molly Brown alongside Michelle Smallmon from Unsportsmanlike. Again, you can hear her 5 to 9 a.m. Central Time, I should say that, on ESPN. Can you just walk us through, just curious minds have to know, walk us through like a morning of getting ready for Unsportsmanlike. What time are you getting up? What time are you getting to the studios? When are you leaving? Give us all the details. I love that stuff.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll take you through this morning as an example. So things are a little different during football season and not during football season. But right now we're in that lull before the Super Bowl, so it's a little different. But usually after the show, we have a meeting where we talk about what's coming up. We spin it forward. What guests do we have? What topics are we interested in? And that gives our production team some insight into how to build the rundown. So when I leave every day, I know during the day what I need to prep on. So I'll say, okay, we're going to talk about the Jets tomorrow. This article came out in The Athletic. So after I leave during the day, I'll be reading about that. And then they'll send out an early rundown around 5 o'clock. So before I go to bed, I have a pretty good grasp on what I need to do in the morning. I'll have my questions prepared for our guests. I'll have my thoughts and my stats that I need for whatever topics we're discussing. And if there's no game to stay up and watch, your girl's in bed by 8 p.m. I have a whole sleep routine that I have gotten down to a science. I am taking the sleep gummy. I am underneath the weighted blanket. I have the mouth tape. I am listening to my sleep stories to go to bed. And I am locking in and getting those hours in that REM cycle that I need, because that alarm goes off at 4 a.m. So then we start in the morning. The alarm goes off at 4. I pop out of bed. I get a matcha or a coffee ready, jump in the shower, I get dressed for the day, gather all my things, get in the car, and I come down to the studio. I live in New York, so I'm not driving myself. So as I'm driving in, I'm going over the emails from our production staff. Okay, has anything been added overnight that we may have missed? A big story that developed. I'm looking at the different stats that were sent out, updated stats in the morning. Sometimes I'm reading different articles en route to the studio. And then I get here usually around 5, and I go straight to hair and makeup, which is the most fun for us during the day. Anita and Lou and Ashley, the whole crew back there, the music going, and we kind of set the vibe for the day. We start having fun. They get us glammed up. And as we're in there, we're talking about the show or life that ends up on the show. But we're starting that conversation. I know that Evan on his drive in will talk to our producer Nuno, who kind of guides him through how he needs to hit things or set us up for the day. And then usually it's a mad dash because it takes a while to glam me up. So usually around 5:52, I am running to get a new coffee or a new matcha and running into the studio to plug in, and then boom, we're on. And then we're on from 6 to 10 Eastern time, and it goes by in a flash. And, during the show, every commercial break, we're in conversation with our production staff. What's coming up next? What do we need to hit? How do we reframe that? Should we adjust things? Has anything broken during the show? And then once it's over, we kind of start that cycle again.
Such a grind. It's crazy. Like, it's crazy because, like, I think that's what's fascinating about radio is you don't realize as a listener all of the behind the scenes stuff. Like, yes. You just assume that people, it's same with TV, I'm sure. Like, you just assume the guys get there and they just talk about sports and that's it. No, like it's totally organized. There's so much work behind the scenes. So I love just getting a peek behind the curtain on that kind of stuff. But one more question from me. Just what would be some advice that you would give to other girls and women that are looking to make a career for themselves in the sports industry?
A couple things. First of all, I would say if I can do it, you certainly can. And again, I never had someone that I could look towards that occupied this seat. But now that I am here, I don't have any connections in the industry. I didn't play professional sports. There's really no reason that I should be here. I never had an easy path or anyone that could pull up this chair for me. But I worked really hard. I tried to learn as much as I possibly could from the smart people around me. And I said yes to everything. Anything that came my way, whether it paid me nothing or paid me, $50 every 2 weeks, I was like, this is experience that I can learn from. And I know not everyone is in the position to be able to do that, but I truly think saying yes to things, even things I felt unprepared for or that I was afraid to do, allowed me to open the doors that eventually led to the path to me to get here. I would also say that you shouldn't compare yourself to anybody else, circling back to what we talked about, because I tell women this all the time. What I have learned in this role is that my best asset is being me. Like there's only one Michelle Smallmon. And to women, I think a lot of times we do try to compare ourselves to somebody, or people try to do that to us. They try to say, like, people all the time will say to me, oh, what do you want to do next in your career? Do you want to be the next Erin Andrews? And I'll say, no, I want to be the first and only Michelle Smallmon, because no one can ever be Erin Andrews because she's her, right? And I think as soon as we realize that our biggest asset is being ourselves, and that the only way that you can succeed in this business, particularly in radio, which is the most transparent medium, is by being yourself and being genuine and being authentic. And the other thing I would say to women is look for someone who can help you, because I never really had that early on in my career. And once I got to the network level at ESPN and was working with other women, it changed my whole life. It changed my career. It changed my perspective on things, to be able to have people like Jen Latta and Diana Rossini and Amanda Gifford and Louise Cornetta, who, whether they were on air or had been on the production side or were working at a managing level, to be able to have women to go to and have conversations with and get their advice and lean on their expertise, and have someone understand what it's like to be a woman in this industry, because it's not easy. And we are always going to be, well, hopefully not always, but at least right now we are still outnumbered, and it's still different for us than it is for our male colleagues to be operating in the sports space. To have that sounding board of women changed everything for me. So be yourself. Go for it. If I could do it, you could do it. And if you can, try to find a female in this industry that you can use as a mentor or a sounding board in some way.
I'm taking all of that advice and putting it in my pocket, keeping it with me always, because I love that. I loved all those things. That's so great. This has been Lead Her Forward. We got more coming up next across ESPN Wisconsin. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.